Hello, my name is Darren Atkinson. I'm an inventor, but I want to give you some background. I left home in the 80s. I started as a musician in the early 80s, and ultimately by the end of the 80s, I was out of my hometown of Midland in Canada here. I moved to Toronto, Canada, and I toured extensively. Since then, I've probably did, I'd like to say 2,000 shows. It might be close, it might be under, but I've done a lot of shows. Ultimately, at the end of the day, I was a musician, I toured, I recorded with bands, the Press Gang, a number of other bands. I played in some tribute bands, one of them notably being the Hooligans. And ultimately, through that journey, I made a transition to a studio owner at a studio called Gomi Sound here in Toronto, Canada. And from that point onward, I started to venture into the United States and Europe. And it got to the point where, I was touring England, Europe, the United States. Then I went on to run an amplifier company out of England. The brand was available and it needed to be reunited. In the 80s, a music industry school called Trebas, where I specialized in management and copyright law, but I also was in the studio there. I learned about microphone placement. I learned about trademarks and copyrights. And all this came to serve me now later in the new millennium. When I look back at an idea about relocating an object in three-dimensional space through the 6 degrees of movement, which are X, Y, Z, pitch, roll, and yaw, which is really the rotation on X, Y, and Z. So at that point, I came across this idea vis-a-vis my experience in the music industry. I was at a session where there was, I was there to play drums, and they had everyone in the studio early. It was hot. Everyone was drinking coffee, something you don't want to do. Everyone's waiting around for me. You got to set up the drums. It's not the way to go about things because people get antsy. They get wired up on coffee, and it's too hot. It doesn't work out. But this engineer / producer thought he knew what he was doing. He's putting mics up in my drum kit. And with the digital era, post, the 80s, you could put more and more mics up in a kit, top and bottom. You might have phase cancellations, but they just keep piling them on. The old way was, they call it the Glyn Johns way. You might even have 4 mics on a drum kit. So nevertheless, these mics got all set up, but then I realized after the fact, a few years older, a few extra pounds, I couldn't get at this drum kit. It was just stands and wires without knocking anything. Because where you place a microphone is critical to the sound. And from take to take, and from song to song, the sound floor will change. You'll notice a difference, so to speak, and it won't seem right. Won't get into any more than that. So you can't move anything. So I squeeze into the drum kit, and of course I knock a mic. And the guy comes over and he goes, "Wow, you're really lucky today, because if it wasn't for people like me working here to take care of people like you, we'd have a problem." So I thought, okay, I don't know what that means, but we'll let it go. So we did some takes, but he's getting sounds. He's not happy. I have to take a break, go to the washroom, come back. Now the mics have been moved, but it's even worse. And I said, "Why did we put the drum kit so close to the wall?" "Well, this is the best thing, and I'm not worried about early reflections. There's a lot of absorbers on the wall there deflecting." I moved a microphone that was on a stand. They swivel a bit. They have a bit of play. This is what happens. So now this guy's really tense. And he says, "Wow, you might guess what country I was in." He goes, "Really, you're just really lucky I'm here." And he goes, "You're from where? The United States?" No, you're a Canadian. That's right." He goes, "Yeah, I think we used to own that." And I went, "Okay, where are we going with this?" Someone just taking the piss. That's what they call it there. This is in the UK, actually. Let's just say it. And there's so many great people there. But this guy's taking a piss at me. I have to have the skin for it, so I take it. But I started thinking about, what makes you think you can put that microphone back there exactly? My father was I would say a self-trained master carpenter / joiner, as they call it in England. And he could make a mystery box, that's what he called it, and some sailors would have these things to keep their stuff safe when they're not around, in their bunker, their kit bag. And, it looked like just a wooden box with seams that were, where it looked like would have been glued. It was so tightly fit. But what it was, some of those joints would move, and you could press certain spots, and then the box would suddenly open. And in one case, he had one where a little lion would have paws. It would offer you a cigarette. Or maybe you could hide something in there like money. So I used to be amazed. How do you make it so perfect? He goes, "Well, it looks perfect, but in theory, perfect is a dangerous word. And at best, most of the time when you do things, you eyeball it unless you have a jig and you're measuring, and the old phrase is measure twice, cut once. So you're going to have to go through a myriad of processes if you want to even come close to that word exact." So I said, "Well, And he said, the only thing that you can do is come close because you're eyeballing it. So be careful when you say things are exact or that's exactly where it is, because you're not telling the truth. You're just using that as a crutch to, to get your idea across. It's the best possible position. Close only counts in horseshoes and hand grenades. So I said, all right, fine. So this guy had, he was giving me a hard time over the microphones I bumped. We'll go back to England in the new millennium at this session. And there's a set of microphones on top called, they're XY overheads. They stereo image the kit on top of all the other mics. And if you bump them, it's kind of a problem because they capture the overall sound, and any change to them is even more noticeable. That being said, I had to get out of there, and I bumped one, and this guy came over and gave me a look like, what am I going to do with you, you useless you-know-what? And I said, well, he goes, are you going to put it back there exactly? I go, of course I am. He goes, you can't. I said, really? I go, I don't think any of us can. So you can put that back there exactly. And he put it back, and I go, that's exact. He goes, that's exact. I go, do you know what that word means? He goes, I'm not here to discuss a language that's native to my country. You don't even know what you're talking about. And then I said, all right, you want to play that game? So I didn't say anything, and I thought, you know what? So if you just put it back there exactly and it only took you a second, do it again. And I hit it, and it swung out. And you can see this guy's face was just staring at me, and I swore like a little muscle twitched in his eyebrow, kind of like Spock. This guy was tense. He puts it back, he doesn't say anything. I go, do it again. And as soon as I knocked it, he dove at me. And we damaged microphones. I got fired. Everyone was mad at me. And that band is gone, that session was gone, and so was the money. So I went home thinking, why couldn't I just keep my mouth shut? It's not something I do well sometimes, but if you ask me to tell you something, be careful what you ask for, because if it's the truth and it hurts, that's your fault. So this guy here had been tense, but then I started thinking about my father, and it just came to me. Basically, irregularity. We always look for 45 degrees, 90 degrees. We talk about pyramids, shapes, cube, sphere. It's all something that we can measure, even something we put in a vise like a cube. And we're comfortable with that. We're imposing regularity, trying to make, whatever is in chaos conform to our plans, what we want to create, et cetera, for lack of better words. So it came to me that if you were to take the simplest three-dimensional object, which would be a tetrahedron, and make every single aspect of it unique, every length of every edge, every angle in relation to the next surface, and therefore every surface area would be different with every shape, it would automatically visually teach you something. But then if you were to take the one point of that tetrahedron and follow those lines down to the edge of any one of the triangles, you get a tripod. But that tripod, where it would be virtual legs are going to land, would be, if you mark them, would be unique, and it would capture that one pinpoint that they all emanate from in space in an exact position. How would you do that? You would mark where they touched. How would you mark it? Well, if it wasn't something physical, it was something easy to imagine and see visually, like a laser or a light source, you could just mark that position, line it back up, turn it on, line it up, and it would be exactly where it was, really on a pinhead within 6 degrees of motion, depending on the intensity of the laser and how small the dot was you marked. You could literally put it back. And people say, oh, I can do that with my cell phone, I can do this with that, surveying equipment. Whether you use a gyroscope, GPSs, and certain other instruments, really, the level of accuracy doesn't even come close. I think it's 6 centimeters or 8 centimeters for military GPS, and whether you combine that with other things, visual through the lens analysis, there's distortion there, changes of lighting, temperature changes could affect many different things. The problem is it's not exact. But if you mark the spot and then you follow those laser lights back as a virtual tripod to one point, and you would have that built into anything, kind of like a microphone, right? Like a microphone. And there's 3 spots on my palm of my hand. If you mark them, and then you came back the next day, turned on that laser, and took that irregular thing, that irregular tripod lasers that represents a virtual 3-dimensional tetrahedron, then that mic will be exactly where it was before. And that's how I thought of it. I just was laying there thinking about how broke I was and how awful the session was, and how my father used to grill me, and God bless his soul, he passed away last year. I probably didn't listen to him as much as I should have. I cannot build a mystery box. You might find me slack at times when I'm finishing up my jobs because I just want to get them over. I'm not a big lover of woodworking, but I'll do it and have fun at times. he could do it as close as anyone could, to be exact, and give him that credit. But I can't. But this device will allow a microphone, which was the problem during the session, to go back exactly where it was. And when I realized that, I had to start a process, a journey, because, well, I hadn't even started it yet. I wrote it down on a piece of paper and left it. And I'll save that for the next video. I actually thought of the idea, then I let it languish. Because I thought, how would you do this? I wasn't in the process then. No, I understood intellectual property and copyright protection to some degree. I didn't know how to get a patent. So we'll continue on with the next video. And you hear about my friend Keith Houghton, who came and gave me language and perspective so that I could get this down on paper, then apply for a patent. That's phase 2. Thank you very much. This is a part of my Indiegogo campaign, and I think you're going to find that I'm going to lead you through every step of the process that began 15 years ago. I'm going to walk you through the whole thing, because right now we're at the concept stage, and we're actually morphing into the prototype stage, and a finished product will be done by the end of January, because I have a factory in China working on it. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you. Stay tuned.